we start, I'm going to introduce Elvira from Language Mind. She'll be doing Spanish translation of that student, and she's going to just be posing that question.
Buenas noches, soy Elvira y estoy aquí para servirles y ofrecerles interpretación en español. Muchas gracias.
Oh, thank you guys for coming tonight. It's great to see so many faces here. We have a wonderful panel for you, and I'm looking forward to our community conversation. We'll be talking with you all, like you should have all received comment cards when you came in. But before we start, I want to bring Jennifer Hopkins up, the city manager for Broomfield, to welcome the group. This is a really important meeting.
Jennifer Hopkins, City County Manager of Broomfield. We're grateful for the turnout tonight and for the interest. There's been a tremendous amount of dialogue over the last few months with regards to homelessness, housing, a multi-pronged approach. I wanted to start before we introduce our panel this evening, which is a wide representation, which is an indication that this conversation, there are no decisions going to be made tonight or for the next 6 to 7 months. There is a thorough, deeply engaged plan. We'll have the dates within the next 2 weeks for what the community engagement piece looks like. We plan on covering all of Broomfield for education, conversation, and dialogue, which will then help inform staff's recommendations of what we do next. The myth that I want to dispel, I'm hearing a lot of chatter about Baseline now proposing low-income housing. That is not a fact. That is not a case. It never has been. We've not discussed that, nor is it proposed. Unless you consider low-income housing being 60 to 80% of AMI. AMI is average median income. It's a housing term. So what is being proposed there is affordable housing. 60% of AMI, which for our inclusionary housing ordinance that has been passed, for all new units, if it is for rent, 20% of those units need to be 60 to 80% of AMI. So in other words, and our AMI in Broomfield is almost $100,000. So 20% of the rental housing is going to be affordable for individuals making $60,000 a year. 10% of the for sale units that are going into Baseline will be 80% of AMI. That is by ordinance. That is the inclusionary housing ordinance, which means in order to afford the for sale, you need to be making $80,000 a year. That is not what any of us consider to be low income housing. When we have developments that are proposed and they go through a PUD plan, which is a plan that essentially sets out without specifying tenants or businesses, it sets out what the overall plan for that Baseline community is going to be. The concept review that was heard yesterday in Baseline followed the inclusionary housing ordinance, which includes those rooftops going in being 60%, again, for 20% of the rental, 80% AMI for the for sale units of the overall units. There is nothing on the table that council is going to be deciding on with regards to funding for any plan, because there isn't one. So when we move through the next 6 to 7 months of the community engagement portion, when we come back, it will be fully vetted of what the long-term plan and concept looks like. Some of the conversations have been, you're going to become a magnet. We all know from all of our, whether it's personally or professionally, when you plan on doing 5 things, 3 of them get done and half-heartedly. 1 of them doesn't get done at all, and 1 kind of gets done. My friend Paulo, who will be represented as one of our regional partners in Adams County, during his presentation, when you focus on a particular topic, which quite frankly, all indications are, homelessness will be a portion of what we discuss, but the overall way that we are going to move forward from a comprehensive and a collaborative approach, you have to have a more robust approach than focusing on any one problem or issue. So when we do housing for all, increasing the housing stock, we have brought more affordable units on, and again, affordable is different than attainable. We brought more units on that are either in the pipeline. Academy Place is a good example, right down on 120th. That's considered to be attainable housing. The AMI is 40 and above, 40% of AMI. So again, from the round number, just think about that 100. Increasing the overall availability of units and focusing on keeping people housed. The most effective way that we can impact any housing issue or targeted area is keeping people in the homes and or housing that they are in right now before they drop off. So if we can, again, Adams County, from a prioritization perspective, prioritizing, and if we're keeping them, if we're keeping them in their homes, then they're already Broomfield residents. That is not to say that some of the residents that are going to be coming into some of these units that we're bringing online will be strictly Broomfield residents. So thus, the importance of having deep, meaningful conversations. There aren't going to be any decisions that are made by staff nor council without having the community engagement portion. We expect that we'll be coming back April, beginning of May, sharing the information that we've gathered throughout the community in order to develop the plan. Just wanted to spell those notes quickly right up front. We're going to turn it over to the panel. We have people on the line that will be fielding questions. I know some of you have filled out the question cards. We're going to try to get to every single possible question so that people don't leave here. If we're unable to answer the question, whether it be from our panel and or our staff, we'll collect them outside and we'll be sure to get back to you. Huber.
Great. So, well, it's really nice that everybody's coming, but I still filtering in. You find the seats, there's also overflow outside. So just to go over the agenda with you tonight, the reason for this meeting is these are tough issues to discuss. And there's a lot of different perspectives, and we're hoping to get some of those out on the table tonight. I'm not going to say that everyone knows all the answers, and that's why we're here having this discussion and continuing community engagement after tonight. So we'll start with the panelist presentation. One of the main reasons we're having the discussion tonight is for education, so we're all starting at the same baseline. And the other main reason is we want to hear what you're thinking about. We want to hear what your issues are. We want to hear what your concerns are. We want to hear the data that you are looking for, so you can help provide that to the residents, to the community of Broomfield and the region. So we'll be going through our panel presentation. You should all have comment cards. If you don't, we will be issuing them throughout the meeting as well. We'd love you to write questions down throughout the meeting. Put them on the card. We'll be collecting them and we'll be reading them to the panelists after the meeting. If you need more, raise your hand. We have lots. So we want to hear what you're thinking about. There's not too many questions. There's not a dumb question. We really want to hear your thoughts tonight so we can bring this up in this community forum. If you're on the phone listening, you can call 855-695-5633. 3744 and press *3. You can do that throughout the meeting, and please, you'll be given to a moderator on the phone, and you can ask your question that way. So we'll be taking questions from the group tonight in the room and also questions from the phone. After that, we'll be having, after the Q&A, we'll be having next steps. So we want to hear from you also. How else would you like to be engaged? Who else needs to be at the table? And then finally, there's a resource table out back. When you walk in, there's some resources from our different nonprofits, so please feel free to take some of those resources as well. Some of our ground rules for tonight, we really want this to be a civil conversation. There's a lot of different perspectives. These are hard issues. We want to come to this room with curiosity as opposed to sort of positional. So you may have some positions, but if we can ask you to open your mind tonight to other people's perspectives, we'd love that type of curiosity coming into the meeting. Respectful, we are going to ask that after the panelists present that there's no responses, no clapping, no commenting, just as a listening to move through the panelists, and also so we don't have a lot of responses after the panelists speak. And then masks are recommended for group meals. Those are our ground rules tonight. We are really excited to have everybody, and I'm going to, again, on your question cards, just thinking about what information you need, how can Broomfield address this issue, what are some of your ideas? Okay, so without further talking from me, I'm going to start introducing the panelists, and then we'll hear from them. Again, throughout the meeting, please do feel free to write down questions, and we'll be collecting them. So Peter, the Executive Director for Making Housing Partners, will be starting the conversation tonight. Then we'll be talking to Kristen Heiser, the Deputy Director of Housing and Human Services from the City of Boulder, Paulo Diaz, the Manager of Adams County Community Safety and Wellbeing, Martin Dormish, Minister of Community Engagement from the Refuge, Dana Scott, the Executive Director at FISH, Allison Hanna and Dominic Gianperri, the Case Manager and Peer Specialist at the Community Reach Center, and finally Susan Bellis, Broomfield and East Boulder County Regional Director for the Mental Health Partnership. So I'll hand that to you.
Thanks. Can everybody hear me? Well, I just want to thank everyone for coming tonight, and I want to thank the City of Broomfield for having this conversation. I'm Peter Lomari. I serve as Executive Director for Maker Housing Partners. We're the housing authority for Adams County. We own, operate, and develop multifamily affordable housing, all the way from kind of unsubsidized, just self restricted real estate assets, all the way to subsidized, as City Manager Hoffman was sharing before, primarily serving folks from about 70% of AMI all the way down to zero. And majority of the heartbeats that we serve are individuals on fixed incomes, seniors, Coloradans experiencing disabilities. That makes up over 50% of the folks that we're so privileged to serve. The rest are students and individuals working throughout our communities. And so we have over 2,000 units. They're only units until there's a heartbeat in them, and then they're homes. And so for me personally, I've been in this work since back in about 2014. Prior to that, I spent a decade working as a civilian in support of national security. And I truly felt a calling to come in and work in anti-poverty work and provide housing opportunities because I see it as a direct correlation to our national security. So many of our great men and women are unable to accomplish what their talent provides and go after their own version of the American dream because they're unhoused or they're housing burdened. One of the most tragic numbers of homelessness is actually homelessness that many of us know, but we just don't really understand or see, and it's called McKinney-Vento level homelessness. That's two lawmakers back a couple of decades ago that identified kiddos who are homeless, right? So they're couch surfing, they're living in cars with their parents, they have no mortgage or no lease in their family's names. And there are thousands of them here in Adams County and Broomfield. And while I don't work directly in Broomfield, I feel a deep kinship to Broomfield, and housing is regional. So to be able to spend some time today talking a little bit about the history of homelessness in America, which tragically has been with us really since our forefathers founded. We'll talk about that in a second. So, one of the things that when I think about the why, right? For me, I came into this, as I mentioned, in service to our great country. And when I think about it, I'm not here just to play with adult Legos, as I like to call it, which is build big buildings. Although that's really cool. I get to take my daughters and show them, kind of vacant land or housing that had seen better days and what we can transform that into. It's not about the bricks and sticks, as I mentioned before, and I say it specifically, it's about the heartbeats, because these are just units until someone makes their lives work. And, if we could, think about the why, and if you would indulge me for a minute, it's just to maybe close your eyes and think about what home means to you, right? What it means to us. What does that conjure? How does that make us feel? I think for the vast majority of us, it brings up an immense feeling of gratitude. It brings up feelings of love, of memories of our children growing up. It brings up community and all of those things that make community special. And so home undoubtedly is something that we feel fiercely defensive over. It's human, it's natural. We have absolutely every right to be concerned about our community, about who's living in our community. And so first and foremost, I think that, I just want to share that your opinions are valid, they are valued, and they are material. And so ultimately, my job tonight isn't to tell you how to feel. It's just simply to share a little bit of my experience, try to connect with you, and have an opportunity to just discuss how our country has tackled the many waves of homelessness crises that we've experienced throughout our great family. And so, as we think through this, it's no surprise that ultimately people want to move to Colorado. We have a tremendous economy. We have amazing work-life balance, and it's drawing folks to Colorado at unprecedented levels and numbers. And so we're not building enough housing, and we struggle to build housing. Housing is the epitome of change. I recently had the opportunity to author a report for a think tank here in Colorado called the Common Sense Institute, and my co-fellow Evelyn Rim and I really dug into, why are we struggling to build enough housing for folks? Have we done it before effectively, and are we doing it effectively now? And ultimately, each year, we've been averaging about over 70,000 new Coloradans. But we've been building about 25,000 homes for that. And this is across the entire state, but 90% of our population lives in the Front Range. And so as that's happened, if you overlay that with some of the major periods of homelessness, and we see consistencies there. And so as we go through periods of economic and climate disasters, right, we see mass migrations of individuals. And we go through wars, right? So after the Revolutionary War, there was periods of homelessness. In the period of the 1850s to the 1870s, there was a lot of impact because of changing in our agricultural-based economy to manufacturing. And so, as many of us know, the Great War actually kicked off, World War II kicked off a period of unprecedented manufacturing might. In fact, it freed the world. We stood up the greatest manufacturing machine the world had ever seen, and it won us, and it liberated the entire world. But when the brave men and women who fought and supported the troops in those theaters of war came home, they had nowhere to live. And so that's been kind of consistent. Again, after Vietnam, we had another experience of a spike of homelessness, as we've seen for the great housing market failure of 2008, which really we haven't gotten out of. That really impacted us in Colorado. So we were humming along there right before 2008 and almost at equilibrium where we were building housing. The state demographer says if we have about one house for every 2.1 Colorado households, we're going to have greater equilibrium, and we won't see these significant price escalations that are impacting us all over the last year or two. And so, I think the key thing here is that, this is homelessness tragically it's not new. This isn't something that is the direct outcome of any nefarious decision-making. It is a correlation to the natural kind of ebb and flow of our society. And so us, like generations before us, are faced with a challenge. And that challenge is how do we balance all of these competing demands, keep ourselves safe, have a home and a community that we love, that we want to see thrive, and also balance those challenges that are hitting us for folks that are unhoused. And so each time, and this is bipartisan, right? So LBJ, Truman, FDR, they've all taken significant steps here. And each and every one of them have been federal level interventions. And so we saw the New Deal, the U.S. Housing Act creating public housing. We had over 1 million homeless individuals in the 30s during the Great Recession. We had massive encampments in Seattle, Tacoma, on the National Mall. These were material. If we think about our population size compared to where we are now, 1 million folks experiencing homelessness is pretty darn significant. And we overcome it, which we overcome anything that comes at us as Americans when we bind together and decide that we're going to solve something. No one can beat us when we are unified in that regard. And housing is an absolute illumination of that. And so as we go through, I won't go each one, I got to move on to my colleague here to my left, but there's significant federal resources once again. Those federal resources we can utilize to address some of these concerns, keep taxation low to not at all for us, because we know how hard it is to make ends meet, as well as not strain existing city budgets and county budgets. And so there is light at the end of the tunnel. It will require trade-offs, and it has been my absolute pleasure to have your audience for a minute. I appreciate you giving me the time. So I am going to turn it over, and I'll leave it here. Nelson Mandela said, "Look, this is our right to dignity and a decent life," and I truly believe that's an inspirational quote. So I'm going to give it to Kristen. And
Thank you, Peter. Before Kristen, you start, just a reminder for all the folks, the panelists, please speak into the mic so it gets captured. Great job, Peter. You did a great job. So speak into the mic so we capture it on the TV. And then if your card is ready, if you've written your questions, you can just hold it up and we can come collect it to make sure. Yep, hold it right up and we'll come back. Thank you.
So good evening. I'm Kristen Heiser, Deputy Director of Housing and Human Services with the City of Boulder, and I have to say it's tough to follow you and Nelson Mandela. So thanks a lot for that setup. And I am going to be, that was a great introduction, because I'm going to be, we went to global and historical, and I'm going to be talking about very local, what we're doing in Boulder, the region of Boulder. And so I work with the City of Boulder, but we are also part of a regional housing partnership, or part of the Homeless Solutions of Boulder County. And we are also the lead agency for the Boulder Broomfield Home Consortium. So I'm going to go through a lot of the stuff that we're doing specifically in the Boulder region, but then I'm going to end with how we have an opportunity to partner with Broomfield with some of the federal funds that are available to our communities. So first of all, oops, going the wrong way. Oops, and I did that, of course. All right. Get somebody with tech, maybe get me back out of it. Thank you. So yeah, so I love that Broomfield has adopted the phrase housing for all, because that's very similar to what we're doing in the City of Boulder. We are committed to everybody in our community thriving. And so we have a mission at the Housing and Human Services in the City of Boulder that we strive for all to thrive. So similar to what you're saying for housing for all. And for us, one aspect of that touches on our presentation this evening. Oh, here we go, is we spend a lot of our time and our resources, to be honest, creating and preserving a diversity of housing options. I'm going to talk a bit about the work that we do, how we do it. I'm going to talk about affordable housing, and then I'll veer into our work with homelessness. But we started with, back in 2000, we adopted a affordable housing goal. And at the time, people were like, that's crazy. Because what we adopted was that we wanted to secure 10% of all residential properties in Boulder as permanently affordable. And then just a couple of years ago, we upped that to 15%. So right now, we are striving to secure almost 7,000 homes as permanently affordable to serve the housing needs of low and moderate income families. And right now, we're at 8.4% of that goal. We have about 3,700 homes that are secured by deed restriction to ensure that people can, that those are homes are available, whether it's apartments, ownership opportunities, a variety of options for individuals that are low income. And those are secured as permanently affordable permanently in perpetuity. As you can see from this map, it's just to demonstrate that while we have this 15% goal, we're also very committed to dispersing our housing options across the city. So where you see this in this heat map is each of those areas kind of shows where we have a little bit of concentrations are our permanently affordable housing stock. And as you can see, it's really everywhere. And if you drive, if you're familiar with Boulder, right up the road, you really can't distinguish what is affordable and what is just market rate housing. So we've been very fortunate that a lot of the housing that is has been financed with federal and local resources, has been built with our housing authority partners, other affordable housing partners, looks just like a market rate house right next door. The other thing is that we invest into our programs. So we work in the realm of everything from emergency shelter to helping individuals who are experiencing homelessness to ownership opportunities. So we actually have a middle income strategy that I'll be talking about in a second. So I loved how you were saying herpes. So on any given night, we have almost 8,500 people that are living in permanently affordable homes in Boulder. So that's 8,500 herpes that we have in our permanently affordable homes. That's 8% of our population in the city of Boulder. So we're really proud of that on any given night, we're able to provide homes and roofs and a safe and comfortable and stable home environment for that number of herpes in our community. So how do we do this? Get there. So we use regulations, we use policies, and we do investments. So it sounds like Broomfield also has an inclusionary housing ordinance. So we have that as well. That actually results in a lot of our housing production, whether it's through the requirements to provide housing or the cash in lieu payments. So what we do is we take those cash in lieu payments and we invest that in our affordable house to reach our affordable housing goals. We also have a commercial linkage fee. So the inclusionary housing is a fee that is assessed against residential development, where our commercial linkage fee is assessed against commercial development. And so we use those dollars to reach our affordable housing goals. We also have requirements within our annexations. If you're going to annex into the city, there's certain requirements that you have to provide affordable housing there as well. We have policies to ensure that we are addressing our middle income housing needs. That is, the missing middle is something we spend a lot of time talking about and trying to navigate in Boulder. We also have manufactured housing strategy. That is I'm gonna blow through this. All right, so we got a lot of policies. And then we spend a lot of our time investing in housing production and strategies. And we use both local and federal funds to do that. So we are a part of Homeless Solutions Boulder County. So what this is it's a systems partnership that we are involved in with the city of Boulder, city of Longmont, the county, and a variety of nonprofits in our communities that are working to really serve the needs of individuals who are experiencing homelessness. It's a housing first model. Everything that HSBC does, the ultimate goal is to provide somebody stable and long-term housing. We rely on an integrated service system. It's probably hard to read a little bit here, but essentially the way it works is an individual who is experiencing homelessness or a family, if they are in Boulder, they to access services, to access resources, they have to go through our coordinated entry process. So there's sites all over the region where an individual, one of them is at one of our older adult services facilities where an individual can come in. They sit with a case manager, they do an assessment. From there, they determine like, what is the best path forward? And it could be anything from if they present opportunities to be housed. We will work with our housing partners to provide housing. We also provide just general navigation and case management. We also provide what is called diversion. So there's some individuals who are experiencing homelessness. It's either an immediate situation or it's something that they're new to our community. And so what we will work with them to figure out what is the best resolution for them. And that sometimes means reuniting them with their community. So they might, we have case managers that might reach out to their brother or sister in Salt Lake City and make that connection that they're able to be reunited with their family. So it's that type of hands-on case management that we're providing to individuals. Happy to talk about more of the specifics of each of those entry points and kind of how we move this along, but I think what is most impressive is just the results. So from 2020, I'm sure somebody will be talking about 1 minute, that there is in the region, once a year, there's a point in time count that takes place where we essentially go out for 24 hours, I believe it is, and we interact with individuals who are experiencing homelessness, learn about them, and we count to really determine how many individuals are experiencing homelessness in our community. In 2020, our count presented 689 people. Also in 2020, we were also able to help 321 individuals experiencing homelessness to resolve their housing crisis. And also for coordinated entry, we touched 1,170 individuals who came through for screening and were able to enter the system, whether it ended up with navigation, housing, diversion, the variety of services that we're able to provide. So I am just going to add a couple things that we're doing specifically in Boulder. Can I just touch on this really quick? So we do have this system across the region that we're engaged in. Why I want to focus on this is because it takes a lot of different solutions to meet people where they're at. So every individual in this room, every person up on this panel, all of our situations are different. All of our needs are different. And so we are approaching our individuals in our community who are experiencing homelessness, whether they enter the coordinated entry system. There's also critical weather sheltering that we provide during the winter months. We also provide non-congregate sheltering, especially during COVID. We had the need to provide hotel and motel rooms for individuals because of the public health parameters at our shelter. We set up a COVID recovery center, so that's individuals who are experiencing COVID or are found to be positive or are having symptoms. It's a place for them to go and lay down in a bed. I mean, when you're sick, you want a place to rest. And so that's what we created, was a 24-hour place for individuals to do that. We also have extraordinary outreach teams that make connections with our community members. And I'm going to just jump to this really quick because this is where I think the meat of this is. So that's just a lot of what's going on in Boulder, but we are part of what's called Boulder Broomfield Home Consortium. Through that, this relationship, we have federal funds that come to the consortium every year that we share. We share with Boulder, the city of Longmont, Boulder County, the communities there, and Broomfield. And so traditionally, so what you see here is the historical sharing of our federal funds. This is a 10-year picture. We rotate these funds every year, and historically, I will share that Boulder has elected to use their portion of these dollars to provide the tenant rental assistance. And so they are providing housing rental supports to individuals to keep them housed. What we do have an opportunity for is because of COVID and because of the American Rescue Plan Act, we have $5 million coming to us in terms of home dollars to the consortium for us to determine how to address homelessness. That $5 million is specifically, they're federal funds, but they're specifically to help us with our homelessness solutions. So just offer that up as an opportunity for us to continue the conversation and to take even a broader regional approach to sharing in a solution and caring for our neighbors and being most creative as we can be. So thank you, I ran over, sorry. I'm gonna hand it over to Paulo.
Thanks, Paula. Thank you so much. And just as a reminder, if you're calling in, please call 855-695-3744 and press star 3. Hello.
All right, thank you. Now I realize that my biggest fight today will be against the clock. My kids like to point out I'm also Filipino, so it takes me 30 minutes to say goodbye, but I'll certainly try to rush through it as quickly as I can. So my name is Pablo Diaz. I'm with Adams County. I joined Adams County about 3 years ago, specifically to work on poverty reduction and homelessness, as well as low-income neighborhood initiatives. And really, that was when the county was just getting started on these homelessness efforts. So this was really us just kind of starting from the ground up and trying to build where it is that we wanted to go with regards to homelessness. And so our department's relatively new. I started out in the county manager's office. So once we were what I call incubated, we launched over to the new department called Community Safety and Wellbeing, where we certainly try to be a little bit more external facing, getting to know our partners, developing regional alignments as to how we're going to approach this. So I really appreciate Jennifer Hoffman and her staff for inviting me to speak on this panel tonight, because it's always great to collaborate regionally on the things that we're working on. But when I came on board with Adams County 3 years ago, there's basically 2 data sets that we all look at. And thankfully, these 2 individuals prior, both Peter and Kristen, did touch on these a little bit. The one on the left is a point in time count. So this is that once a year count that happens at the end of January that basically allows us to count how many sheltered and unsheltered individuals there are. You can see that's a number in Adams County. Presumably it's done at the end of January because people are hopefully sheltered. But with a lack of sheltering options in Adams County, I'll admit it's hard to find individuals when it's really cold outside. Peter brought up the McKinney-Vento data. These are basically the homeless youth throughout our school districts in Adams County. And I like to point this out just because a lot of these individuals, you're talking about kids who basically lack what we call an adequate, regular nighttime residence. And so these are individuals who are going to school with your kids who don't have a place to stay, and they work with McKinney-Vento liaisons through the school district to basically help them navigate resources and services. These were our only data sets. And so I point that out because knowing this, there's not really a whole lot we know about our population experiencing homelessness. And so we really saw our population experiencing homelessness as being invisible. So it's like, how can we develop programs and services to a population that we don't know? A population that we basically see as being invisible. And so what we've done in Adams County is we looked at some of the stuff that we've had. It's just to provide some context, your neighbors to the east, more than half of our population are housing cost burden. That means they're spending more than 30% of their income on housing. Also with that, Adams County has the highest eviction rate in the state of Colorado as far as counties go. Our eviction rate is at 4.4%. The state average is 2.8%. As I alluded to, there is a lack of sheltering options in Adams County. So that's what we knew. One of the things that we did is we developed our Homeward Adams, which is our homelessness reduction strategic framework, our homelessness plan, which was adopted by our Board of County Commissioners. And with that, we looked at 3 key areas. One was homelessness prevention. And I know that Jennifer Hoffman talked about that a little bit earlier because it's important for us because homelessness is such a traumatic experience to make sure that we kept people housed. Another thing that we focused on is homelessness services, making sure that we did have services for them available. And then last one is to strengthen the housing continuum. And so I could talk about all the programs that we did, but then you would just see me glowing and talking for like the next 5 hours, and I know you guys didn't come here for that. But I did put some program and initiatives document out there in the back. Admittedly, I don't think I printed enough looking at the size of the group over here. But one thing I'll touch specifically on is the data that we gathered from our severe weather activation plan. So we launched this program back in December. It's basically when the temperature drops below 32 degrees when it's wet, or 20 degrees below when it's dry. We activate what we call the severe weather activation plan, where people experiencing homelessness can now get vouchers to be able to spend the night in a hotel. You can imagine how important this was, especially when in mid-March of this year, we had a top 5 snowstorm and blizzard in the state of Colorado. For the severe weather activation plan this past winter alone, which we just recently piloted just last year, and so this was like our second phase of a pilot, we were able to avert over 8,300 nights of homelessness, which we were extremely proud of. But one thing that we really picked up from that was the data and ability to get to know our population. And so what our SWAT pilot also did was we were able to align our partners. We centralized our intake initially, which was done over at the library, but now we've actually decentralized our intake where we have homelessness outreach staff from the different municipalities be able to do intakes on their phones. They could go out to individuals when it's activated. They could go ahead and get them signed up, get them a hotel voucher. We would be able to arrange a Lyft ride for them to get them to that appropriate hotel. Like I said, this launched in February 2020, went through April, and then we relaunched it again in October, and it's still going today. And we're certainly eager to get it started again in October. But because of the data, what we really got to know about our population is a lot of them were recently homeless, and I'll talk about that. talked about vehicular homelessness, where we found a good portion of our population were sleeping in their cars. So we'll talk about how we activated programs for that, or starting to. How, Jennifer Hoffman talked earlier about myths, about people experiencing homelessness. The majority of our population who were experiencing homelessness that accessed our vouchers were actually employed, either full-time or part-time, and as well as homelessness being homegrown. And I think it's important for me to, I love engaging with you guys and working with Broomfield, because we know that suburban homelessness, like in Adams County and Broomfield, looks a lot different than the homelessness that we see on TV when they're talking about Denver. And so what do we really get to know about our population? So for those who access our SWAP vouchers, 56% of them were experiencing homelessness for the first time. So I think one of the things we saw during our time is one of the local mayors did say, a lot of the people have been homeless for a while. Our data did not necessarily show that. The length of homelessness, about 41% of individuals began their homelessness episode in the last 6 months when they accessed the vouchers. So I think a lot of us start thinking that most of the people experiencing homelessness have been homeless for a really long time, when in fact our data shows that actually I wouldn't say majority, but the large plurality is actually in the last 6 months prior to that. I mentioned homegrown homelessness because it's important for us to bring up that this is our problem. This is Adams County's problem. It has nothing to do with the fact that Denver is moving individuals up. And once we take ownership of that, then we can start developing policies and programs that really address homelessness. So you'll see here that the majority of our people experiencing homelessness who access our vouchers listed Adams County as our last permanent residence. So the importance of tailoring programs, it really acknowledges the uniqueness of the individuals that we've gotten to know during our homelessness services. We get to mold programs around the people, and we get to reach people where they're at, and working with the different municipalities and their outreach staff into getting to know these individuals. And so just a few more slides, some of the things that we got to do, we're starting to do is we're hosting a Native Housing and Homelessness panel, because we learned about our population, that even though Adams County, the Native American population is less than 1%, 11% actually showed up as people experiencing homelessness who did access our vouchers. So we want to get to know why. We want to meet those individuals and really try to address those services. We're also focusing on ending veteran homelessness. Adams County, we recently partnered with the city of Aurora to expand our Day Works program to veterans experiencing homelessness with the city of Aurora. And the reason for that is because we found through our data that there was at least 57 veterans experiencing homelessness in Adams County. So we're part of the Built for Zero movement, convening a group. And one exciting thing about that is we're really targeting and think that we can be the very first large county in the state of Colorado who can end veteran homelessness because of what we're trying to put forward on that. And then we're also offering cell phones and Wi-Fi. We found that 58% of our individuals who were experiencing homelessness who accessed our vouchers listed contact information, but we were only able to reach 26% of them. How can we reach them and connect them to services if we don't have a phone? So we did a smartphone drive, we collected those smartphones, we've retrofitted them, and now we're actually starting to put some smart benches. We're going to be putting some smart benches along Adams County so they can charge their phones, so they can connect to a hotspot, so they can be able to access those services that are so important to them. And really the key takeaways, and look, I beat the time pretty well, that I really wanted to come across is that it's about people experiencing homelessness are prevalent, because I think a lot of it is what we're exposed to, right? But it is so important for us to really get to know our population so we know what programs and services are appropriate for the people we're serving, and making sure that the data is also actionable. And it's also important for us to stay humble, because this data will change. And we also know that what we're doing now might not necessarily work a year or two from now. So it's good for us to continue to innovate and progress. So that's my presentation, and I'll pass it back before we pass it on to my good friend Marty.
Thank you, Paula. Great. Don't forget to write your questions, pull them up. I have a couple up here so far. Martin, please.
Good evening, everyone. I just want you all to know that I have a gavel. So, good evening. I'm Marty. I'm with the Refuge. I'm also a part-time housing catalyst in Broomfield, and I serve as a full-time minister of community engagement at the Refuge. And I'm going to be reading my remarks so I don't go over my time. We're a hub for healing, community, and social action, and we've been serving Broomfield in the North Metro area for 15 years. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the Refuge and Broomfield as a whole sit on the traditional homelands of the Arapaho, the Cheyenne, and the Ute nations. and that to this point in the pandemic, 77 Broomfielders have died of COVID. I'd like to highlight several local efforts for you tonight. The Refuge Cafe is a low barrier day shelter at our facility off Quay Street. On Tuesdays and Thursdays from 10 to 4, it's open to anyone, including people who are in need. We serve free lunch, offer free showers, Wi-Fi, household necessities, and survival supplies. On-site advocates also help our guests navigate systems and make referrals to other area agencies for jobs and other resources. The Broomfield Cares outreach van goes out once a week to connect with people who might be in need, especially our neighbors who are staying outside or in their vehicles. Like most of what we do, while that effort is hubbed out of the refuge, it operates in partnership with other local agencies and volunteers. We also help facilitate the Code Blue effort, which provides hotel vouchers for residents in emergency situations, including our neighbors who are unhoused during extreme cold weather. And we help facilitate the Broomfield Safe Parking Program for people staying in their vehicles. The safe lots themselves are hosted by 3 other Broomfield faith communities. I'm excited and hopeful that, like Paolo shared, last year Broomfield joined the region-wide Built for Zero effort toward making homelessness rare, brief, and unrepeated, starting with local veterans. Built for Zero amplifies, expands, and outfits already existing programs with tools to both humanize and effectively track and support our unhoused neighbors in their progress toward housing placement. In the last 2 years, at least 4 people have died while experiencing homelessness on Broomfield streets. Their names were James, Randy, Brittany, and David. They all lived in Broomfield for many years. 3 of them grew up in Broomfield and went to Broomfield High School. It was my privilege to know Randy, Brittany, and David through the Refuge Cafe and to call them my friends. They were dear people, made in the image of God, just like the rest of us who call Broomfield home. The Refuge and Broomfield as a whole are worse off because they're gone. Our best estimate from combining different local data sets is that at least 200 people are currently experiencing homelessness in Broomfield, including veterans, seniors, students at local schools, single moms with kids, victims of domestic violence, and people with disabilities. Most of them work hard, as Paulo shared, at low-paying jobs, although many of them once worked as engineers, carpenters, electricians, and entrepreneurs. In my opinion, an unholy trinity of dynamics have brought us to this moment. A poverty of humanity, a poverty of will, and a poverty of capacity. There's a well-known story from my tradition that speaks to these core deficits. The Rabbi Jesus is teaching his disciples about the importance of loving God and loving our neighbor as ourselves as the way to live the eternal kind of life. And an expert in the religious law wants to justify himself. So he asks Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" And in response, Jesus tells a story. He says, there's this guy who's traveling and he gets attacked, robbed, stripped, and left for dead on the side of the road. When 2 religious and community leaders see him lying there, they pass by on the other side. Later, a Samaritan walks by, sees him, cares for his wounds, places him on his donkey, puts him up in a nearby motel room to recuperate, and promises on his return trip to reimburse any additional expenses the motel keeper incurs. So Jesus asked the religious expert, who of the 3 was a neighbor to the man who fell victim to the robbers? And the expert says, the one who had mercy on him. Since Jesus' audience naturally put themselves in the place of the victim, the twist of the story is that the hero is not another Jewish person, not a religious leader like the priest or the Levite who sees the victim and passed by. The hero of the story is a Samaritan, a member of a despised, hated, and looked down upon group of people, considered enemies by the expert in the law and Jesus' disciples. In our context, the priest and the Levite could be cast as a local HOA president, or a local city council member, or a local pastor. And the Samaritan might become an undocumented resident, or in light of our discussion tonight, a local homeless person. When there's no recognition of the humanity of our neighbors who are suffering, no recognition of ourselves in them, and no recognition of our responsibility to them as their neighbors, there's obviously no will to ease their suffering or to build the capacity to do so. And that's the story we find ourselves in. In the midst of COVID, every one of our local agencies serving our neighbors in need on the ground have expanded their assistance efforts, but we're still not close to meeting the current housing-related needs in our community, let alone our future needs. And we've barely begun examining how our policies and zoning practices and wage rates and property values contribute to all this. Some good news is that local advocates have already identified good solutions, best practices, and experiments worth beginning in Broomfield. For example, by way of planting seeds for the coming months, with $2 million allocated from our newly received ARPA funds, we could fund emergency hotel vouchers through the end of this and upcoming years, lease, purchase, or put a deposit down on a wing of local hotel rooms for use as emergency and transitional housing, and hire a multidisciplinary team of Broomfield-focused housing resource experts and case managers to help our neighbors who are unhoused or housing unstable find affordable permanent housing. HUD considers households that spend 30 to 50% of their income on housing as officially housing unstable, and households that spend more than 50% of their income on housing as officially at risk of homelessness. Here in Broomfield and across the country, many hardworking families also live paycheck to paycheck, so any emergency could threaten their housing stability. We're talking thousands of Broomfield families here. With $60 million, we could prevent Broomfielders from ending up on the proverbial side of the road in the first place. We could create and manage a local income-based sliding scale housing voucher program with $15 million for private foundation grants, $15 million from local banks, $15 million from local businesses, nonprofits, faith communities, and residents at large, and a one-time $15 million transfer from the city and county to the soon-to-be independent Broomfield Housing Authority. For reference, $15 million amounts to 3.4% of Broomfield's current $448 million budget. Allocating $3.40 out of every $100 of the municipal budget for such an important priority as housing stability is more than reasonable. That is, if we truly believe this is the priority we say it is, and if we have the courage to act decisively. This problem belongs to all of us. And so my challenge tonight for my fellow Broomfielders and Broomfield stakeholders is this: commit at least 1% of your annual budget to local housing stability efforts. I'm talking to kids running lemonade stands, teenagers working part-time, families on a budget, employees who work here, residents of every neighborhood, every nonprofit and for-profit that does business here in the city and county itself. This is the central challenge of our time, and it will take all of us to meet it. And tomorrow is too late to begin. We are Broomfield.
Thank you, Martin. Great, Dana. Fish.
Thank you. Now we get to see if I know how to work the clicker. We all knew this was going to be our downfall tonight, the clicker. There we go. So everyone, I'm Dana Scott. I'm the executive director at Broomfield Fish, and many of you might know us as the local food bank. We are also a family resource center, and our basic goal is to help families thrive and to prevent hunger. And with this most recent housing crisis, to help make sure that families have stable housing. How many people here are familiar with Fish? Just to get a quick show of hands. A lot of people. I recognize a lot of faces. We have such an amazing community of people who support our neighbors, and our motto is neighbors helping neighbors. And at any point, someone could be a person in need, a donor, a volunteer, somebody who does a food drive. So it's really nice to see everyone here tonight who cares about this issue. I would argue that stability, security, and connection are every bit as important as food in helping to nourish people. And that means safe, affordable housing and the peace of mind that comes with actually having a home. Most people don't know this about me, but when I was a youngster, I moved about 30 times. And I was one of those people who did not have a stable home and was lucky to be very resilient, but it definitely takes a toll not knowing where you're going to sleep at night and not knowing if you're going to have a roof over your head. So this issue is very personal to me, and it's really important, I think, for our whole community. As a family resource center, FISH offers low-income residents food, emergency financial assistance, referrals to more than 30 partner organizations, some of whom are here tonight, and strength-based support to accomplish self-sufficiency goals. The real point is to help people on a pathway to be self-sufficient and to be able to meet their needs. And food is often the entry point for accessing other help. A lot of times a family will go without a lot of things, but when it comes to making sure their children have food in their bellies, they will come and ask for help. And at that point, we're able to assess what else we can do and how we can support our families. So for housing support, what I want to start by saying is that it used to be, I started at FISH about 6 years ago. And when I started, we were really considered a safety net organization. So we were there for people who had some kind of issue come up in their lives that was a setback, right? Maybe it was unemployment, maybe it was a medical bill, maybe it was a divorce, and really it was temporary assistance to get people back on their feet. What we're seeing now, and has been heightened because of the pandemic, is that we feel more like an emergency room doing triage, because we are seeing so many people who, if they couldn't come to FISH, they really wouldn't survive. And so they're not able to get back on their feet as quickly. They've experienced multiple shocks because of the pandemic, and that has really put a challenge on all the resources and a lot of the nonprofits and the city and county who are trying to help people the best they can. So by the numbers, in 2020, FISH helped stabilize 673 unduplicated residents with some kind of emergency housing assistance. And that included rent assistance to avoid eviction, that included hotel vouchers for emergency situations, and referrals to shelters and other housing options. We continue to partner with the city and county and all of our other local nonprofits and the Department of Local Affairs to provide housing stabilization assistance. From October of last year until now, we've actually helped 763 families, which represents 1,982 people with housing. So that is quite a lot of people. This year, we're slated to spend more than $2 million on housing stabilization programs for Broomfield residents. And just to give you some numbers, I know a lot of people have been throwing out a lot of different numbers about how many people do we think are experiencing homeless right now in Broomfield. We actually keep track of all this data. We use the Salesforce system, and anybody who comes to us for help, we keep track of that data. And we actually serve 203 residents who are experiencing homelessness. A lot of those were children. So when we count residents, it's all age groups. It included families with children, single veterans. Among the fastest growing population of homelessness are actually seniors on fixed incomes who can't afford the skyrocketing rents. And I know our housing advocates are seeing some rental properties increase rents by $400 or $600 a month for our seniors who are on fixed incomes who come to us and they don't know what to do. So that's the numbers. That's what we're seeing. With regard to that, one of the programs that we started right before the pandemic, and then the pandemic came and we started doing triage, was a program called Keeping Families Housed. And the two goals of that program are to stabilize families to prevent homelessness, because not only is it less traumatic to stabilize people before they become homeless, it's also cheaper to address this issue before it actually comes to the point of people not being housed. And the second goal is to connect families to resources that support whole family wellness. So I won't go into too much detail here because I'm seeing the 3 minute sign, But this program has barely been able to get off the ground because of the pandemic, but it has a lot of evidence and research behind it showing that it really can not only improve housing stability, but improve a lot of other health and wellness factors, particularly for children. And we're able to actually track progress of that using what's known as the Colorado Family Support Assessment Tool. So we're excited to continue that program and to expand that program in the upcoming year. I want to reiterate that the main causes of homelessness are lack of affordable housing and low wages, because there's a lot of myths around people experiencing homelessness, and there's also a lot of research and evidence that shows that these are the two primary causes. If you look at Broomfield, the average rent in Broomfield for 2021, $1,708 for a studio, $2,200 for a 2-bedroom. Both of those are fairly significant increases. And then if you look at the wages you would need for that, I just want to highlight that if you're a minimum wage worker, you would need to work 97 hours per week to afford the average 2-bedroom home. So here's what we're seeing. To give you a picture of the faces, the heartbeats that we see at Fish every day, we are seeing people who are working, but who cannot possibly afford to pay the high cost of housing that they're paying on top of childcare, on top of groceries, on top of utility bills and everything else that happens. And so really we're looking for bigger picture systemic issues, and it's gonna take everyone working together in order to find that in our community. These are just fun facts. So did you know only 12% of Broomfield residents actually live and work in Broomfield? A lot of the people who are teachers, firefighters, police officers, fast food workers have to commute long distances to come to Broomfield. And there's a shortage. This was from 2017, so I'm sure this is outdated and is even higher now, but there was a shortage of nearly 1,300 units for renters earning less than $20,000 per year. That's a lot of people who need housing. And then I just want to remind everyone that more than half of all the people that we see are children under the age of 18. And so think about how that lack of housing actually affects young people's growth and development. So when you're picturing the people who are experiencing homelessness, large portion of those are kids. And then lastly, I think it's the same figure for Adams County. Approximately 50% of all Broomfield renters are cost burdened, meaning that they spend more than 30% of their monthly income on housing. For our Fish participants, it's actually closer to 70, 80% of their income. So now what? That's the big question of the evening, right? Even if you don't think you have a role to play, you do, and you're here, so obviously you care about the issue. Challenge stereotypes, confront oppression, promote dignity around the issue. We always like to remind people that it's the system that's broken, it's not the people. Recognize that it takes partnerships. Don't expect any one entity or any one person to help solve this crisis, and commit to being part of the solutions and to continue talking and learning. So I really appreciate everyone's time tonight, and I am going to turn it over to you all and the partners and community reach.
Hi, my name is Allison. I am here representing Community Reach Center, and we have mental health partners with us as well. And I am a case manager with Community Reach Center. Me, my colleague, and I, we actually work at a drop-in center. And so I'll just kind of explain a little bit about what we do. I like to think of us as kind of like a rec center for people who are in their recovery. And we do have a lot of people experiencing homelessness come in as we do serve lunch daily. We have recovery focused groups, a clothing bank, and we also have a small food pantry. And so we really, we see these people up front, and as a case manager, I work with them every day to kind of figure out how to get them back into housing. So I'm really happy to be here. We are going to talk a little bit about, we got all of our information from the Denver Basic Income Project. And we're going to be a little bit more Denver specific. So currently, there's 6,104 Denverites were experiencing homelessness on any given night in 2020. There were 31,277 individuals in Denver access services related to homelessness between July 1st of 2019 and June 30th of 2020. And schools in the Denver area reported that 12,879 students were experiencing homelessness during the 2018 through 2019 school year, showing really that there are a lot of children who experience this. And homelessness, as we've kind of been talking about, has really grown in Colorado and Denver. It's grown 15% in the past 5 years. And so I'll continue to kind of talk about mental health and how that plays a role in homelessness. The federal minimum wage is $7.25. So meanwhile, workers would need to make over $22 an hour to afford an apartment at the national average cost. And we're really coming from the housing first model. So when individuals don't have their basic needs met, we know this affects mental wellness, and it's even harder for people to move forward in their recovery if they don't have a stable place to live. Only an estimated 30% of those who are unhoused use alcohol. I know there's a lot of myths that everyone on the streets is using alcohol or using drugs, and only 26 abuse substances. The assumption that all people who are unhoused use substances is rooted in a classism and white supremacy, class first mentality. And so I think we just want to remind people that, let's keep listening. I think we just want to remind people that people who are experiencing homelessness are heartbreak, and they are hurting with their each individual life reasons for how they got there. And so homelessness is not the guy on the street corner pushing a shopping cart. I mean, many who are experiencing homelessness are couch surfing, living in their car, living in hotels. There are 3 safe parking lots in Broomfield, and there's no shelter. People are living in their cars and going to work. Kids are going to school, and they return to these spots. There's a lot of transportation barriers as Broomfield is spread out, urban, and there's not a lot of bus coverage for individuals. And then as we've been talking about, COVID-19 has really increased the homeless population. And there's a lack of space for housing and vouchers in Boulder, and this is also leads to folks really looking to come to Broomfield. Okay.
Hi, my name is Dominique. I'm a peer specialist at Community Reach Center, the drop-in center that Allison mentioned. So up here I have Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I'm sure some or most of you are familiar with. I wanted to point it out specifically because the bottom need there shows like a psychological need: air, water, food, shelter, sleep, and clothing. And so the idea of Maslow's hierarchy of needs is that one level of needs are not met, the ones above that also cannot be met. So their safety needs aren't being met if they don't have food, shelter, sleep, and adequate needs, right? And so personal security. Oftentimes people don't remember or notice that experiencing homelessness can actually be quite expensive. If you think about $65 to sleep at a motel overnight, on top of buying a nice outfit of clothing to wear for a job interview, on top of transportation to get you there, right? So these are all costs that people often forget about. And so if your psychological needs aren't met, your self-esteem, and then overall living a very fulfilling life is very difficult for people who experience this, excuse me. So we've talked about shelters specifically in Denver. We are located in Thornton, and so again, not all that far from Broomfield, but we don't have any safe shelters in the area of Broomfield or Thornton. And so all of these people have to commute far downtown to Denver, right? And even the shelter staff are very overwhelmed, and it's difficult and not always safe. So Just to reiterate, evidence suggests that the most effective model is housing first. So if they have their basic needs met of having a safe place to sleep at night, then they can participate in their recovery and actively work on their mental health. So services also cost money, and how are people supposed to access resources if there's transportation and housing that's not being met?
I think I'll just skip the last slide. Is it left? Counterintuitive. So here's many of the mental health resources. We have a statewide crisis line that anybody can call at any time. It's a warm line. So even if you need a tuck-in call at night for somebody to help you sleep through the night, and then they'll hook us up if somebody has a more severe crisis with our local crisis lines through community reach or mental health partners. So those are good to know. I always like to recommend that people put some of these phone numbers into their cell phones, so they're handy, because you don't know when you're the person who's going to be helping somebody through that crisis. Mostly probably if you are friending somebody who in our community, our neighbor who's homeless, actually through Fish and through the refuge is a great place to start as far as finding resources. And I'm going to put it back to everybody else.
Great. Thank you all so much, and really appreciate you taking the time to be here tonight. Good job. I hated cutting people off, and thank you all for your patience in getting to your questions as well. It's such a rich discussion. So I'm going to dive right into the questions because we have a lot coming in, and they're really great. So just starting with, is there anything we can do to increase the supply of housing to lower the cost of housing? I'll put that to the panelists. Peter, it's actually directed at you in particular, but others feel free to jump in.
Yeah, great question. It truly is a supply and demand dynamic, and you know, cities and states that experience depopulation struggle to meet their basic needs of their existing population because the tax base is eroded. While Detroit is a fabulous place to visit, and I've had good times there, I think we know that the challenges, and they continue to see population needs. So, you know, just kind of, you know, hoping that folks stop coming to Colorado could have, you know, really proportional impacts in ways that we might not see. So I just think depopulation isn't a strategy. So we have to address the supply. The good news is we are building more. We are building more. Last year, we built 40,000 units. This year, we're on pace to meet or exceed that. But we are still consistently seeing, you know, 70,000 folks moving here a year. And so one of the real challenges of supply is that we grew up with this idea of housing, and that idea is not wrong. We want a little bit of a yard. We want a picket fence. We want to have that feel, right? And it's no different for millennials. It's no different for any generation. It's a human desire. The challenge, though, is that as available land goes away, the cost of land increases, and so we have to drive towards density. So we're being challenged personally as to what type of housing is being built, how that makes us feel, the architectural view of that. You know, and I think it's interesting, again, history helps me make sense of the world. You know, I was just reading recently, like, you know, the brownstones in Brooklyn, as an example, that are extremely desired and very expensive now. They were called like abominations back when they were built. You know, folks felt that they were cheaply constructed, that they were, you know, basically replicating European housing styles, and it wasn't American. So I think that, you know, understanding that there's going to be differences in opinions when it comes to architectural styles. Also climate, we are very concerned about water here in Adams County and in Broomfield. It is a finite resource. In actuality, it's extremely cheap compared to how finite it is, but cheap is relative when you're trying to balance your budget, right? And we all know how hard that is, sitting at our kitchen tables making ends meet. So having greater density solutions allows us to have greater conservancy solutions. And so that's going to be a big dynamic for us moving forward. We're going to have to make trade-offs there. We are not building any starter homes. And that's, you know, in the 80s, in 1980, I just saw a great chart. 40% of all new homes built were starter homes. And they averaged about 1,400 to 1,500 square feet. right? Again, we saw North Glen, Thornton, down in, Wash Park in Denver, all those areas that are tall, smaller homes. Family sizes were big, and we've grown accustomed to having a bit more room to stretch our legs out. Not here to critique any of that when it comes to our feelings, but more square footage costs more. Costs of commodities have gone up. So we're facing all of these threats that, impact our ability to create more starter homes, which is what most of us want. The challenge is that our seniors, right, need to downsize from their homes, but where can they go? So they're competing with first-time home buyers, and that's why we're seeing these insane bidding wars. And so what I would share also there is to say that, condo defects is a problem in this state. So we've essentially outlawed the primary mechanism for a housing continuum. And because we really don't have a free market for housing, right? And I'm a big free market guy. For me, we have more of what's called like a precautionary principle, which is like anything that could potentially go wrong, like freaking out about it. Now it has to be quality driven, right? And there were developers that took advantage of Coloradans, and they should be held accountable for that. There was a legislative fix in 2017. I'll stop here. It hasn't, so when I talk to builders, they want to build about 20% of their annual home starts as attached condo products, be able to assist our seniors to downsize and folks be able to move into a home, step into that next home, get some equity, sell it, turn it over, like has become the American way. That doesn't exist anymore. And so most developers are not building attached product, and if they do, it's over $700,000, $800,000 because the risk is so intense. Not only will they maybe lose their business, they can also use their own personal nest eggs. Over 90% of developers that build starter family attached condo product are sued. And so we have to balance that, and we have to allow the market to function so that we can have greater options. We're moving that way. It can't come quick enough, but I just want to, reassure Coloradans that, these types of things are starting to work themselves out, but we have to be able to say, hey, growth is something that is a byproduct of our state's vibrancy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. If somebody in Broomfield is newly homeless, where do they go for help? She's nodding her head.
I think if someone is newly homeless in Broomfield, we tend to see them at Broomfield Fish because we are a food bank and family resource center, and oftentimes they may have already been coming to Fish for food if they were really struggling. And if not, they might end up at the doorstep of the refuge. I think a lot of times our faith institutions see folks, and so it's really important that we have a good connection with a lot of our local churches. And synagogues and faith institutions. I think human services here in Broomfield, I think a lot of people enter through that. I think the key is there's no wrong door, right? There's no wrong way to enter. And the good news is we're Broomfield and we're small enough and we collaborate and we talk to each other. And so I think we don't have a large coordinated entry process like you hear about that in larger counties. We have a very solid informal network of local government and nonprofits that work together really well. So I would say any of those places.
Thanks. Just sticking with you, what is the source of the $2 million that Fish is slated to spend on housing stabilization?
Sure about that. So of the $2 million that we're slated to spend, 1.7 million of that is actually coming from the Department of Local Affairs, which is actually federal, state, different sources of money, but it comes through the Department of Local Affairs, and we're able to access that as a subcontractor with the Department of Local Affairs. So we actually work within their system and their guidelines to provide immediate assistance for rent assistance for folks who are threatened with eviction. And there's a whole host of different qualifications that have to be met and T's and I's crossed and dotted for that to happen. And then about 300,000 of that is funds that Fish has raised, either through, some of it is through our private nonprofit
grant that we get with Human Services, and then others of it are through individual donors and local businesses who support that effort.
Great, thank you. My parents live in Broomfield, and addressing these challenges will help them. Housing for all, the rising tide lifts all. Thank you for this conversation. How do we ensure our senior population knows about these resources? Marty?
I can try that one. I know our senior services in Broomfield are very, they work very hard. They're very understaffed, and they have, I think I talked to one of the representatives there, and she had like 1,000 messages in her inbox, which was totally stressed me out. But that's one place to start. Senior services is connected to our wider Broomfield Community Services Network, which is what Dana was referring to earlier. That's a really good place to start. And we're also trying to build relationships with some of the senior housing complexes in the area, so that we can, when we hear stories about seniors who are spending up to 100% of their income on housing, and they can't afford to buy underclothes, then we have a problem. And that is a real story.
Thank you. Sticking with you, Martin, what does the refuge need in terms of canned food, clothes, dishes, pots and pans, furniture? How do we get in touch with you, and how do we get involved?
Well, if you're here tonight, you can take our materials that are at the resource table. If not, our website is therefugeonline.org, and you can get in touch with us through the contact tab there. We are not a place where you can donate furnishings and household supplies. We've actually had quite a debate about that on our staff, who our team is here tonight. We don't have the space to store that, but we have a lot of local partners that do that sort of work. So there's the Joyful Journeys thrift store, there's the Arch thrift store, there's Habitat for Humanity, and Goodwill is in the area as well. There also is a new organization we just connected with that helps formerly unhoused people who have just gotten housing. They help furnish their entire department. And I am not recalling the name of that organization, but they're based in Boulder, and they help anyone in the area. So that's a really good resource. And if someone would, get in touch with the refuge, and we'll find that information and send it to you. In terms of canned goods, the best place for those is Fish, or one of our next door neighbors is the North Everett Harris Food Pantry.
Great, thank you. And we're still taking questions, so if these are causing follow-up questions, keep them coming. Is this panel a substitute for a council hearing for Broomfield citizens and constituents to create a policy? And how will this policy be created?
Thank you. No, it's not a substitute. It's a start of a conversation. Again, we're planning 5 to 6 additional community engagement events, workshops, charrettes, if you will. There has not been a policy that's established, nor dollars attached. So what we don't want to do is, we don't hear plenty about how well a lot of communities don't do this. Housing for all, as well as low-income housing, as well as homelessness. So what we don't want to do from a staff or a council perspective is spend good money after bad. What we don't want to do is go a year from now and be in exactly the same spot that we're in, without the data, without measurable outcomes, and without the capability to say, what did we do right, and what can we change as we move forward. So having a deliberative long-term approach and having a targeted approach. Again, we talked a little bit about it in the beginning, that if we do 5 things, if we take a pot of money and we divvy it up from homelessness, a lot of people have been trying to deal with homelessness for decades, for eons. No one has found the silver bullet. There's nothing that would indicate to us that we're going to find it. So again, that what we do know works, and from some of the panelists tonight, keeping people in their homes and or apartments now is the best resource and the best way that we can spend our money. Not all of our money, but again, from those recommendations, we won't have that until we move through a process.
I'm going to keep you here for one more question. There's been a lot of chatter about SOS, safe outdoor spaces, specifically 10 locations in Broomfield. What's the status on this?
We continue to have some conversations, when we initiated the conversation back in January, I'm sorry, July, I apologize. When we were charged with identifying locations, it was a fast moving conversation, and primarily that conversation was about camping, enforcing our ordinance that prohibits camping in open space and parks. So I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, were privy to individuals that had made it a permanent placement in our open space. Legal advice indicated to us that prior to moving that person, we had to have a viable resource, a place for them to go. No definition of what that looked like. So we traversed quickly from having a safe outdoor camping, but that hasn't been on the table for over 2 months. I do not foresee that. Again, I don't want to say never ever, but I feel really confident that that is not an option that we have been exploring since July, nor something that we're going to be exploring for the next 6 months to a year. So again, I don't want to say always, and I don't want to say never, but I can say that that hasn't been a conversation that we've been entertaining. The safe outdoor camping, again, came all from that enforcement component for our PD to be able to enforce that ordinance. We've had one individual make it through 4 stages. So the stages are notification, follow-up. We have a team that's called a chart team. It's comprised of mental health, PD, our human services, all 16 of us are in the back room right now, make up the chart team. So again, deploying that to that site to ensure if there are services, ascertaining from a mental health perspective, and then you get to the fourth step, which no one looks forward to that. It's one thing to say it, it's another thing to look at it on paper, but then executing on it, which is something that happened today, this morning. So balancing the compassion, but as well as there is a line, and that we walked up to that line this morning, and having our police officers that are already at high risk with regards to liability, anytime that their hands touch anybody, we need to be really mindful of that. So that's a long answer to get to the place to be able to say the whole outdoor camping really started with legally what opportunity can we, when we tell these people they have to go, we have to have an option. And that was part of the initial conversation of what that option could be. We didn't execute on the option. Again, with our legal department and the chart team, that's also where we started having the conversation about the vouchers. So we're continuing with the vouchers for cold weather. We've been doing that for the last 3 years. It's been effective, in partnership with the refuge and in partnership with Fish. And I know that there's going to have to be funding questions that are coming soon. So I'm just going to stand here and wait for the next round of those questions.
They're hard issues and not easy solutions. So thanks for bringing these questions up. How will teens graduating high school be able to afford an apartment and live in their hometown without being forced?
Yeah, and that's at the forefront of everyone's mind. You know, I think, again, you know, that's going to happen. And what's going to happen is it's going to make individuals and families ask themselves, is Colorado home for me? Or is Broomfield home for me? If my loved ones, my daughters, my sons have to leave, right? You know, we want to enjoy in the bounty and benefit of seeing our children grow up and thrive and have grandkids. So, you know, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to really ask ourselves, what trade-offs are we willing to make to increase that supply? I mentioned perhaps smaller housing sizes that do not sacrifice on livability, density when it comes to multifamily, condo defect legislation that's common sense, that doesn't generate, you know, a payday opportunity for predatory litigators. And that's going to require, you know, constituencies at the State House that are going to have to look inward, right? And say, well, you know, because it's not what we always expect when it comes to an ideological discussion. And so we're going to have to ask ourselves, you know, and I think Marty was talking about it, is, okay, like only 1 out of every 5 Americans that are eligible for a housing choice voucher, and the vast majority of folks that are eligible are seniors on fixed incomes and Coloradans with disabilities. That if we don't fund at least another couple out of every 5, we're going to consistently see this, because as Marty mentioned, and we've seen from a number of the other panelists, these folks are working. They're working. And now that Main Street is shut down, or, you know, it's finally coming back, thank goodness, they're working multiple gig jobs. And so as we look at these social safety nets and how we invest in folks, but also require them. So once you have opportunity, then you can have accountability, right? So that's the whole thing with Housing First, is it's cost more. If we look at the conservative kind of fiscal look at how we pay for homelessness, and then what it costs to develop housing, it is a conservative ideal to spend the money in that way, and not, you know, I think as Jennifer mentioned, throwing good money after bad. And so we're going to have to make those tough decisions when it comes to our housing types.
Thank you. And there's a follow-up question that touches on a little bit about what you're talking about in terms of how do we ensure that folks who are supporting are working toward that self-sufficiency in terms of accountability measures.
I'll be quick, as I'm sure a panel member would love to talk on this too, is, you know, there are tremendous training programs that are available that once folks are in a period of respite and they're housed, they can say, okay, yeah, you know, because if we want to build our community, I mean, right, our blue collar workers, quote unquote, were the ideal of America, right? Like we mentioned this before, they won the biggest war that we've ever faced. And that was built off our manufacturing prowess, men and women, right? The riveters, et cetera. And so we are short over 5,000 construction laborers, and we have multiple programs that will be boot camps right now in our school districts, right? Reintroducing shop classes, right? You know, the industry is being modernized, so it's not as brutal on our physical bodies. And so you want to go in and after a couple of years with no school debt, go and start building the homes for your kiddos, for your future family members. You can earn a living, have no debt, and have the pride of craftsmanship that is associated with building something with your hands. And so I think there's tremendous opportunities there. We have to invest in those transactional, transformational employment opportunities.
You mentioned others might have an idea in terms of making sure folks can be working to be self-sufficient. Is there anyone else that would like to add?
Yeah, I want to go back to the question about high schoolers who are looking for housing in the area, and the short answer is there is none, really. And I think that brings up the question of policy and those sorts of things that are more structural that need to be a part of this conversation. We can talk about meeting basic needs and direct needs of people, but policy is also an important part of this. And so a couple of examples are Broomfield has a accessory dwelling unit policy that was passed by city council. But to my knowledge, and I could be out of the loop on this, only one person has taken advantage of that so far. I don't know, someone
Right.
correct me if I'm wrong.
That's right.
So one is not enough. It's a start. You gotta start with one, but that would be one possible option for family members who are, just recently graduated or coming back to the area after graduation or something like that. So policy is super important. And then this goes back to an earlier question, so I apologize for that, but my team says that I should say the refuge does need some things, and that includes, we provide laundry packs for our guests if they need them to go to the local laundromat and wash their clothes. So we put together packs that include a $10 roll of quarters and a couple gel packs of laundry soap and some dryer sheets. And those go super fast. Those are like literal hotcakes at the refuge. The other thing too is that we provide gas cards for our guests if they need them. Typically they're King Soopers cards that are $15 each. So if anyone wants to help with that, we would welcome that.
Thank you, Marty.
Can I just say one quick thing about that?
Please, yeah.
I think it's a really important question to be asking, how are you helping people become self-sufficient? Because, and especially in a pandemic where people have suffered multiple shocks and it's gonna take a little bit longer, I get asked that question all the time. Well, how long do you get, how many months of rent support do you give people and how long do you keep that up? The good news is that we really tailor it to the specific family and individuals, and we have amazing, highly trained paid staff who build the trust and build those one-on-one relationships in order to work with families on a budget, to work with families on what of the different things that make you self-sufficient are you really strong? What are the barriers? Maybe the barriers to childcare. How do we get you a CCAP credit? Maybe the barriers to transportation. We hook you up with somebody who could donate a car. There are lots of great ways to do that, and it's kind of like a matching game. And it's very individualized, but I think it is really important to be asking that question because sometimes it's really simple things that help people overcome barriers. And other times it's a much bigger systemic issue, particularly if there's things where people are struggling with mental health issues or substance abuse issues, or if there's other things that are longer term, require longer term solutions. But I'm glad somebody asked that question because I think that is really important that we're doing that work.
Thank you.
We should probably do like a speed dating.
Yeah.
We have 25 minutes left, so if there are any questions.
All right. So I think this one might have just, what are the creative ways to get families or individual people housed? What are some creative options? And I think that you would have a great response to that. Is there anything else on your mind about how we should be creative about these issues we're facing?
I'll just say one thing with the seniors, which I thought was interesting. There's a couple of ways of using technology to match people who want to make a little extra income in their home and seniors who need more affordable housing. There's a couple different websites that you can go to that we refer seniors to that help match. And so that's a creative way to solve it rather than necessarily going in a country building it, although I think that's an awesome way to do it too. But yeah, and again, it's that matching and it's the sort of who do you know and you have people who might want to earn a little bit of extra income who have a larger house with somebody who do that.
Well, I just want to add, the amazing thing about the panelists and the communities that we work in and our colleagues is this is every community in the United States and across the world really is kind of dealing with these issues. So Broomfield does not have to create their solutions on their own. There's a lot of resources. There's a lot of collaborative spirit in the metro area, whether it's Boulder, Denver, Inglewood. There's just a lot of resources. There's a lot of great ideas. There's a lot of great ingenuity and innovation that's out there. And it's just a matter of tapping into that. So I guess I would just say, we are all about borrowing ideas in Boulder. The things that we're doing in Boulder, we did not invent. We are all about like learning about, looking at the research, finding other ideas, being a part of cohorts where we can learn from each other and just really invite that through. I think there's an opportunity for us to kind of expand our circles to make sure that Boulder and Broomfield and Adams County and beyond are all really talking, because we're all trying to solve the same problem. It looks different for each individual, but when it comes to the systems and the resourcing and the policies and regulations, ADUs, the financial tools that we're talking about, it looks the exact same thing. This looks the exact same in Boulder. So I just think we should be really leveraging just the wealth of amazing information that's out there, and where people have already cleared paths to just say, that's a great idea, let's try it. I mean, I've been taking notes here, I'm like, smart bench, that's awesome. We've got to do that. I mean, so like several ideas came across today, but there's no reason why we have to invent it, so.
Great point. That feeds into the next question around budgets, and wondering, there's great ideas, but what is Boulder's budget for programming? What is Adams County budget for programming, including salaries for both? And then how is Broomfield going to be funding this?
So our general fund budget for housing and human services is about 25 million. Oh, did you want to go first? I'm sorry.
Oh, no, please.
Oh, okay. So about 25 million, about 2% of that goes towards our program that is specific to homeless services. And that includes MPO staffing and programs and a variety of things. So it's about $2 million a year that we put towards that. I would say that that budget, that is just our general fund budget. We have about $30 to $40 million that we bring in from federal funds and other resources that we have to leverage in order to do the programming that we do. And you can get really creative with that. I mean, it sounds like Broomfield has an inclusionary housing ordinance. We have a commercial linkage fee. We have to help pay for this. Our communities do. And it doesn't mean it has to come on beyond my tax bill. It could be on the developer's tax bills, and it gets passed along, and it's all that sort of stuff. I see you like saying what, but what I'm saying is there's creative ways to do this. Is that, for example, in Boulder this year, we passed the eviction prevention rental assistance program. Essentially, we have a tax on all rental licenses, and that is a mom and pop rental license or a developer or a housing authority. Where $75 on that license then goes into a pot that we're providing rental assistance, legal services, mediation to individuals to make sure they do not get evicted. And so it's things like that where you can think just really creatively about how you use local resources and public dollars and public institutions to help generate dollars that you need to solve a very expensive problem.
Paolo, and then we'll go to
There you go. So I used to be on city council, and I forgot how to push these buttons, so I don't know how you guys work these things. So with Adams County, when I had started 3 years ago, our total budget was, if I did the math correctly, we carried it to 0. So we really had nothing to start off with. It wasn't like, here is the amount of money that you have to launch these homelessness programs. It really was just a matter of presenting ideas, presenting concepts, presenting that there's a reason that we're doing that to our board of county commissioners and saying, this is what we want to do and this is what we want to tackle. So we're up to a staff of 4. We're about to get 3 AmeriCorps Vistas. I think we're going to hire another person. So I think we'll be up to like 7 or 8. See, I did the math earlier, and now I'm struggling trying to figure out the math. So from a staffing end, that's really what we're trying to do. We're relying a lot on AmeriCorps Vistas, so we don't really drain a lot of the budget on that. But we launched a program called Bayworks, which I alluded to earlier. We piloted that with Bayard to provide low to no barrier employment for people experiencing homelessness as they work toward permanent employment. In our pilot year, we had 71 residents go through that program and 35 were placed into permanent employment. So that program, gosh, I'm trying to remember how much the budget is. It was about just over $400,000. Now we're going to continue that program, and now we're also expanding it to City of Aurora to work on the veterans experiencing homelessness. When we talk about homelessness prevention, I know that City, County, and Broomfield are also supporting our legal aid program through Colorado Legal Services to keep people housed when they're going through eviction processes. We launched a program last year that we continued now beyond a year with Colorado Poverty Law Projects to keep people housed in the mobile home communities, because Adams County does have the highest number of mobile home parks and mobile home units in the state of Colorado. In fact, we just had a recent case, one of our attorneys from Colorado Poverty Law Project shared with me regarding a resident who experienced sewage backup 3 times over the past year. The mobile home park wouldn't do anything about it. And so the Colorado Poverty Law Project reached out to them and basically got the issue resolved. So we try to keep people housed because, as I mentioned before, it's such a traumatic experience for people experiencing homelessness. We were able to launch that program this past year. Now we're launching a housing mediation and navigation program. And with that includes mediation, as well as trying to recruit new landlords who have not yet rented to people with low to poor rental history. And so we're launching all these programs now because we have the data to back up the need for it and who we're specifically targeting. We're about to go to study session, I think, next month to talk about potentially purchasing hotels for transitional housing or permanent supportive housing, because now we have the data of here's who this program would support. We're going through the text amendment process right now to potentially allow tiny home villages in unincorporated Adams County, because now we have the data to say here's what we're looking to support. So we started from 0 3 years ago, and I can't do the math right now to tell you how much it's going, but I will tell you that they make me go in front of county commissioners every single time just to be able to now get more funding to launch programs.
So we're vastly different in Broomfield. We have 34 square miles. We have an open space goal of 40%. It is in our comp plan, and it has been around since 1990. We're at about 35% now. So it's not just open space, it's open land, it's open parks. And so we talk a lot about development, and I'm gonna cover all 4 of these cards. There's a bunch of funding in this answer right here. It's about priority. And so oftentimes when you have a finite pot of funds, and then we have 73,000 is our population. We're nowhere near Adams. Excuse me, we're nowhere near Boulder. So those comparables on the numbers of units they need, the number of homeless that they have, again, it's all relative. So when we look at council's priorities and the community's priorities, affordable housing and sustainability, those are both expensive. Those are items that require that multi-pronged approach. One of the cards asks about cash and lieu. We talked about funding before. So we have federal funds, home funds that were in the consortium. You saw the PowerPoint earlier. That there's $1 million allocated to Broomfield, which is a portion of the consortium funding that we're with Boulder. What we do know, here's another one of the cards. We have a lot of regional, not just outreach and conversations, but we are deeply tied to our neighbors from before we became a county, being in Adams, Weld, Jeffco, and Boulder. So that residual is capitalizing on services from those other communities. It's expensive to establish sole solutions within Broomfield. So do we collaborate? Yes. Is it a regional approach? Yes. Do we need to pay our own way? Yes. Part of the inclusionary housing ordinance, if they don't build the units, if you remember we talked before, 10% of all new units for sale need to be affordable. 20% of all new units for rental need to be affordable. If the developer comes and says, kind of what Peter was talking about before, on a single unit, on a single family home, the construction defects have added about $100,000 per site to build. So you take Broomfield, it's expensive to develop here. Emily and I were just having this conversation yesterday. Broomfield's an expensive place to build. It's an expensive place to be. So the subsidization for a lot of the things we're talking about is high because the volume is not as significant as it is in Boulder and Adams County. So developers can do cash in lieu. I'm sorry, I should have brought my water. So just bear with me as I can make it through this. Cash in lieu is per unit, there's a cost, there's a price. And the developers can say, rather than supplying the affordable units, I'm just gonna pay you money. We're gonna put it in a housing fund. We're gonna put it in the housing fund. And with that housing fund, that's part of the transition from city council being the housing, kind of the board of housing, and the advisory committee transitioning into independent housing authority. By January, we're gonna have about $4 million in that cash in lieu fund. Part of the policy decisions that are made as we move forward and priorities is going to be tapping into those funds to keep a whole host of, whether it's purchasing units, buying units, subsidizing wraparound services. That's what cash in lieu is for whoever asked that. So oftentimes it's cheaper for a developer to do a cash in lieu. Because when you have a certain number of units, it's in perpetuity, right? So if you're gonna do X number at an average median income at 80%, they need to stay at 80% average median income. So it depends on the developer, it depends on the spot. Again, Broomfield is darn near built out. So the opportunities to come and say, to have building envy, I toured one of Peter's, and I know this is a long answer, but I'm covering like five parts. To bequeath land, the city and county of Broomfield owns very few parcels. It's privately held land. So those agreements that we have when developers come in require a litany of conversation and applying policies with regards to that inclusionary housing ordinance or the pay and lieu funds. The other cash, we have a rental assistance program. We started it before COVID. It's more of a bridge the gap, however. So individuals that apply for it have to show that they are in fact sustainable. So car broke down. Kid broke the arm and you had to do a copay. Some incident occurred that didn't allow you to pay for that month's rent or mortgage. We pay those funds directly to the landlord. That program is under our auspice and control. It's not a federal fund and it's not a state fund. We can loosen those restrictions to have a more sustainable participation, similar to what Dana was talking about with Fish's program. We're in the same pipeline as Fish. When individuals go to Fish, they move through the pipeline with regards to funding. They land oftentimes in Dan's shop, human services, whether they utilize the services or not, whether it's SNAP or any other kind of state funded assistance. That's the grant funding. And then we get the CBD home funds. Here's the last one I'm going to do, regional approach. Yep, covered that one. A long-term solution requires long-term funding. I appreciate this question. There's been a lot of conversation about the ARPA funds. So because Broomfield's a city and a county, we're going to get about $20 million. We get half this year, and we get half mid next year. The ARPA funds are one-time funds. So we all know from our household budgets that you're not going to buy something that's going to require a monthly payment when all you're ever going to have is the down payment. So the approach has to be a thoughtful approach, capitalizing on other dollars. Staff presented a very 50,000 foot view of the ARPA funding. I can tell you that housing was not part of that package. The ARPA funds are strictly for the most impacted community, places in your community that were impacted by COVID. So it's not a general distribution pot of money. Housing is certainly part of the available criteria, if you will. We just received this week additional treasury direction on how those funds can be expended. Staff will be coming back to council with that direction, the policy direction. We wanted to be sure in Broomfield that same way we did with the COVID dollars. We didn't want to spend anything until we knew that it was going to be approved on the back end. So we're a little bit slower than some of the other communities that come up with a plan and then get the money and then expend it. We did it the opposite way, which was we don't want to have to repay anything. We don't want to get jammed up on the back end. So we'll be coming back to council with suggestions on what those expenditures look like as we move forward. But the point is, you're absolutely right. You don't want to build a sustainable program based on a one-time pot money.
We're a little short of time here, but as Jennifer mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, if we didn't get to your question tonight, we will be making sure that there's a process to hear the answers to your questions through a comment response from the county. So one question is, if more services are provided to people experiencing homelessness, will Broomfield become a magnet? More homeless populations start coming here. That's directed toward the panelists if anyone wants to talk about their experience with that.
I can start. I did want to share just briefly an answer to the previous question before Jen started talking about the financial issues, that some other creative ideas that are out there involve what Ann was referring to. There's another pastor locally, Reed Lester from Broomfield United Methodist, had a very similar idea to do a house sharing program for seniors, directed specifically at seniors, and that's been on the back burner because of COVID, but it's a really good idea. I totally agree with Peter and Kristen, who said that we should steal ideas from other places that are good ideas. We absolutely need to do that. Through Build for Zero, we're also eligible for new resources that we didn't have before, including permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing vouchers. And so getting into those sorts of circles is really important for Broomfield. And then I think because there are so many issues with federal programs in terms of paperwork and vetting processes, local hotel voucher program is really a good idea to consider moving forward, because Broomfield is not eligible like our partner counties, Adams County and Boulder County and other local counties. We consolidated after HUD stopped issuing new housing vouchers, new Section 8 housing vouchers, which we probably all have heard about. So we're not eligible for a large number of those. And so we need to get creative on our own. Another idea I think that is really a creative idea that needs to be considered is working with some of our community organizations who are struggling. For example, fraternal organizations like the VFW, Lions, and others like them, because they have property. They have often storage lots for RVs, and those could be potentially in partnership with them to benefit them and benefit people who need housing. Those could become affordable housing for people who live in mobile homes or RVs. Dana was just writing me a note that one thing that's a really big need is because there is such abuse that happens, for lack of a better word, in many mobile home communities. Paula could probably speak to that better than I could, because there's so many mobile home communities in Adams County, but it's happened in Broomfield too. And what if we had mobile home communities that were owned by residents instead of some large corporation in another state? So I think there are a lot of ideas out there. In terms of attracting people to Broomfield, because we provide services, many studies have shown that most people who are in need and unhoused tend to stay in their own community, because that's where they're connected. That's where their home is. And regardless of whether they have four walls or not, that's where they want to stay. So in general, that is not an issue that communities see. So for example, Denver has a camping ban. Is that going to mean, all the people in Denver are going to descend on Broomfield? The simple answer is no.
Thanks, Martin.
I'll chime in on that quickly, and I absolutely agree with Marty over there. Just because as the data shows, and we showed it up there, is that homelessness in Adams County is homegrown. We showed that a lot of people were in Adams County, and I think one of the things that Marty alluded to, which I completely agree with, is there's a reason why these individuals, whether they're experiencing homelessness or not, feel tied to their community. One example I have is one individual that we know of who lives in Brighton. They actually have a family member who lives in Brighton, is a business owner in Brighton, but is experiencing homelessness because he has a lot of pride and does not want to move in with his family member. The last example that I will provide with that is an individual who lived in an encampment, got a notice to move, reached out to me and said, hey, I don't know like where I'm gonna go, and I can't really move anywhere because I work at Taco Bell down the street. And so when you have individuals who are tied to a community, whether it's their families, whether it's employment, it helps me remember that these individuals choose to live in that community because they have a tie there and not because there's services there.
Thank you. Dana.
I would just add one more quick thing, and that is the 203 people that we saw, the residents experiencing homelessness in 2020. Most of them had strong ties to Broomfield one way or another. A lot of them actually had children in schools in Broomfield. Now, obviously, it's PBSC or 12 schools or other Jetco schools, but it's there is that strong tie, and they had employment in Broomfield or children in schools in Broomfield. We did see people coming through, but generally what I would say about some of the people experiencing homelessness who are transient who are coming through are like, I'm on my way from Nebraska to California where I have family members where I can crash their flight for. It was more sort of that kind of experience with folks. It wasn't people from neighboring communities being like, I want to be here. So I don't think that argument, I don't think that you're going to see more people beating down our community.
I want to note the time and also that this is a really important conversation. Jennifer indicated she'd like to stay and continue to answer some questions for another 15 or 20 minutes or so. If those of you have to leave, we understand. We told you till 8, but for those who would like to continue the discussion, answer your questions.
Let's check with the panel. If anybody needs to, who will not be offended. We're so grateful for your input.
I do what Jennifer tells me, so she tells me to stay.
Thank you all. So there is a question here, I'll answer quickly. What was the policy only one person had used? And that was the ADU policy for build a secondary.
Was that the ADU question or was that the enforcement question?
The ADU? Here's a
alternative housing unit. So it's like a tiny house on your property, but that it doesn't require, thanks for coming, that it doesn't require an additional sewer line or water line. And it's again, it's contained on your personal property. Yeah. I don't have my reading on so you can go and see. How many locations for how many and locations for camps? We're not doing safe outdoor camping. I'm not sure how to make it any clearer than that. Other than that is not on the table. Are these Broomfield residents or U.S. citizens? Homelessness relocated from Denver, other cities and states. I think Dana and Marty had indicated that they're really the boots on the ground for folks that have come in that are struggling being unhoused or homeless. And they have close ties to Broomfield. So again, from a data perspective, the local government, since we're not boots on the ground and we don't deliver that services, I defer to their to their numbers. I can also tell you that our PD We have Deputy Chief Implement in the back. We have Commander Mark Goodell. They're really our touch point for our homelessness population. They know 90% of them on a first name basis. We have not had a homeless person arrested. We have not had a skirmish with a homeless person. Again, we had to execute on the enforcement on the first time today, clearing out the camp. Again, our other touch point for if there is any kind of increase and it's not service related, if it's just location related, our PD would know within 24 hours that they're seeing something that is unusual or out of the ordinary for right now.
There's a couple of questions about prohibition on drugs and alcohol as qualifications for homeless populations and how we can address drug issues that do occur. So if anybody wants to speak to that.
Peter, you had a really.
Oh, yeah. Well, in permanent supportive housing, I think the key thing is to reduce the trauma and the costs on first responding entities from your locality, right? So, you know, the way it was kind of said, so traditionally, permanent supportive housing does not have barriers when it comes to requirements for individuals to be sober or to not be using substances. They have harm reduction once they get in, but essentially every time, that's why, you know, it's extremely expensive to serve unhoused individuals, because every time in the winter they find themselves inebriated, we don't want them to pass away on our city streets, so that we have to bring them to the police department. That costs money. It's very expensive. Now, when we talk about other types of solutions and safe overnight parking and encampments, safe encampments, they do. The one that's very well known in Denver does have a no drug policy that does not relate to alcohol, from my understanding, but it does relate to substances. Traditional multifamily communities do not drug test. They are just like market rate communities, and they are just like when we buy homes. We're not subject to that litmus test. But there are house rules, and if there are out of legal contract behaviors that are in violation of your lease agreement, you will be held accountable. And so I think it depends on the type of subsidy, depends on the type of housing and the intervention, but traditional market housing, which are all low-income, the low-income housing tax credit program is how, that's another, I'll go into that later if we have time, but ultimately it depends on the type of home.
Peter, just sticking with you, there's quite a few questions about public-private housing developers, partnerships, involving the baseline developers, buying or renovating other houses and projects. Can you speak to how developers and have a role in this?
Oh, that's I was going that way with LIHTC. So the only way to build affordable housing in America at scale is via the low-income housing tax credit program. It was created by President Reagan. It is a bipartisan program, and what it does is it keeps the amount of federal funding in low-income housing communities below 10%. So the vast majority, all my projects that I developed using the low-income housing tax credit program have little to no federal funds. So it's a shared burden, right? So we service, if I need a new roof, new elevator, it's based off rents. And so low-income housing tax credit communities are not subsidized for their operating expenses by the federal government. That's public housing. It's actually illegal to build public housing in the United States. It's called Fair Cloth Amendment, and that was instituted under the Clinton administration. So that's why we see, we have in our mind's eye these, kind of dilapidated, non-upkept housing, because in public housing, you're prohibited from cutting a profit. So you have to wait on Uncle Sam in Congress to allocate the money annually to fix your roof, to fix the elevator, to keep up the marketing path. And so we all know that the federal government doesn't do anything on time. They have continuing resolutions after continuing resolutions. So it's a failed model. That's why we moved to LIHTC. And so what happens is that private developers or housing authorities compete for these low-income housing tax credits in the IRS program. They're allocated to the state based off census, and then we compete for those. When we get that, then I syndicate those low-income housing tax credits on an open market, and I sell that to be able to bring in equity. And if folks will just indulge me on this, is for low-income housing or affordable housing, right? I have to keep my debt lower, right? So if we are all in a business together and we want to build market rate housing, we can put 20 to 30% down and finance the rest with debt and service that debt and our required margin and profit on the shoulders of the tenants. That's why we see rents continuously increase, right? It's inverted for me. It's inverted for us if we are in a business to create affordable housing for our community. I have to be able to bring in 70% of equity because I'm only going to be able to carry a small amount of debt because I want to suppress those rents. And by suppressing those rents, the only way to service the debt I have on the project is by those rents. And so ultimately, that's why it's so hard, because and we're all competing in the same market, as Jennifer mentioned. So I'm not getting the housing authorities, it's very rare. I get zero direct support from the county. I'm an individual political subdivision. I'm a real estate engine, right? And so for us, we're an anchor institution that's a real estate engine with a people heart, right? And so ultimately, I have to survive off my guile and our ability to be able to buy land, to develop land, to sell land and assets, and we use that to push that back into the mission. So ultimately, what we're talking about with public-private partnerships is how do you bring together a public entity, right? Maybe they donate land, as Jennifer mentioned, that Adams County for the first time in their history donated a decommissioned asset with about 5 acres. They used to be the Children and Family Services Center where kiddos were placed in the foster care. And so they gave that to me with a deed restriction and an affordable covenant that had transparency for community members to know how I could use that land, when I use that land, what happened if I didn't use that land appropriately. So there's full transparency as to what that taxpayer investment is doing. We took that and we used, because we were attacked the cost, took the cost out of the land, keep our debt lower, we got those tax credits. And now we turn that spot that used to be a place of trauma, although required, right? Those kiddos need to be protected. But we talked with them, they helped us design it, and we turned that into a place of respite. And so now we have 12 units serving youth that have aged out of foster care out of 116 units, and we have 70% of AMI down to 30%. And so that's an example of a public-private partnership that I think is extremely successful. Another one would be, let's say a housing authority that is maybe, looking to partner with a developer because they don't have that internal balance sheet to be able to support. There's a lot of guarantees, millions and millions of dollars. My average project size is about 35 million. And so, and that's after land basis. Pre-development is usually $250,000 before we ever get from dream to groundbreaking. And so by bringing in these partners, we reduce the amount of federal funds, which reduces the amount of taxation that our taxation is going into these deals. And we share that with the private market. What I would say is for LIHTC, if we're Apple or American Express or Google, the LIHTC program offers a dollar for dollar tax rebate off their bottom line obligation to Uncle Sam. And so it's a win-win, and that's why it's so popular. And less than 1% of all low-income housing tax credit communities default, they go into bankruptcy, because there's so many checks and balances when it comes to oversight.
Oh, great answer, thanks.
That was a lot. I love this job.
So the question really quickly with the affordable 40%, the question is, I'm not sure exactly where the question is going, but suffices to say, given that it's in the comp plan, we have a tax that goes into our open lands as well. So if there was a time where there was someone wanted to convert those lands, it would have to go back to the people. There's a very transparent, lengthy process for that to occur. So I know that there's some grumblings out there that if we were to convert some of that 35% that we have right now, it could go for housing. I have not heard that, haven't been approached, council hasn't had any conversations about that. That is not something that we're certainly privy to. And the path that would be required for that would be lengthy, difficult, and very transparent, that everybody would have to weigh in on.
Thank you. Why did the 4 homeless people die in Broomfield?
That would take several hours to truly unpack in detail, but a couple of them had health issues. One of them died while he was sleeping outside in Broomfield. Another one had to go in for surgery and died during the surgery. One of them was hit by a car and killed. And yeah, those are the immediate circumstances, but there were obviously a lot of factors involved. They did have family in the area, some of them, and just very complex situations. But yeah, I think it's a tragedy, and it shouldn't. I think that's 4 too many.
Does anybody know in Boulder County or the state of Colorado how many programs exist to help unhoused people, and just a rough estimate?
From the Boulder County perspective, I can't give you a finite number. And the reason why is because so many of our programs touch on different pieces. So for example, through the City of Boulder Housing and Human Services Program, we have case managers that serve our older adult population. And so on any given day, our older adult services case manager might get a call from a senior in the community who is homeless or potentially facing homelessness. And so that is just one interaction. So there are solid programs that are available out there. And through the coordinated entry program that I was mentioning and everything else like that, but just so much of our programming just touches our community members that are at risk of or experiencing homelessness. It might not be a shelter, but it could be providing food through a food bank, or it could be providing assistance in how to navigate accessing healthcare. So it's really hard to tell you like a finite number as to how many programs are out there, because it's just such a web of resources and services that we are bringing to individuals on any given day to support them where they're at.
For the resident that asked about the homeless camp that's on 84th and Devonshire, case in point that our PD knows about every single person that is camping. That's not Broomfield.
So the reason I asked that is because you have members up here from Adams County.
You bet. And I was just going to say that I'll give that to Paulo. Perfect. And then maybe you can put your number on the back and follow up with it.
Well, I think it would be more of interest. I know it's not in Broomfield, but we have all these representatives from various areas. And I'm very curious about that one.
For them to follow up on it, or?
No, just to answer it.
Okay.
I apologize, can I ask, because I'm not aware of what's.
There's a homeless camp at 84th and Devonshire, south of the neighborhood, that Devonshire townhomes and so forth. So that would be that high school, where the high school is. So just south of there. I called the police on that encampment because it's affecting the community to the north of that. And they're have drug paraphernalia that they bring into the community. They're stealing utilities, both electric and water, and Adams County does nothing. There.
Yeah, so I'm not entirely aware of that. Is that an unincorporated Adams County? I just have to ask. Okay, great.
So it'd be the sheriff, Adams County Sheriff.
Okay. My friend Marty over here just kind of shared with me the location. Let me look into that just because I'm not aware of it.
And I can give you my card.
Please, thank you.
So the other, yes, we'll make the slides available along with the whole conversation tonight, the link for the meeting. We'll put that out so folks that work here or would like to go back to a certain portion or have additional information on our panelists. So we'll be sure to do that. The last question, it's important that the long-term approach is inclusive of the disabled and veterans and other high-need populations. How are the providers meeting and or providing for these populations specifically?
I would say that that's an excellent point, and it speaks to the fact that it is not a one-size-fits-all issue, and that it is very individualized, and there are a larger percentage of people who are veterans who do experience homelessness, and there are other populations who have larger, percentages who experience homelessness. The best way to address that is connections and collaboration. And so we work very closely with Veterans Affirmative here at Broomfield Human Services. We work closely, there's a program, a supportive housing program, it's the Veterans Association Supportive Housing BASH program, to place people in longer term housing. Really, it's just leveraging those partnerships and that collaboration to make that work. And getting back to the building trusted relationships with each of the participants, so that you know what the story is, you know what the best way to go about supporting them is.
From the IDD populations, our leadership team and Jeff Romine, our economic vitality champion, all went to Discovery Church to hear from a group of parents, and there's one of them sitting in the audience now, so I knew that this card was from you. Oh, was it? That population is, the IDD population is in our opinion, overlooked in all of these conversations. And I can tell you that from a acknowledgement perspective, that was a moving night. There wasn't any one of us leadership that left that evening not being committed to having that seed planted, that as we move forward on this housing for all, it includes that. In fact, we're going on a tour. Probably too many of us, they're probably not expecting the whole, we all move like a little kids soccer team. They all move together. So we're going to Boulder to do a tour of their really cool facility up there. So
Program is that?
Jennifer, a lot of people don't know what IDD is.
Yeah.
oh, I'm sorry. It's the intellectually and developmentally disabled. And a lot of those parents that were there are, I can't remember the correct word, but it was, I'm going to be 55 tomorrow, so. But they're concerned about their kids and not having a place for them, and there's not even a place that's remotely close to us. So we all thought that the piece of land that's right across, so yes, I'm going to say it publicly, the piece of the parcel that's right across from Friends would be a really ideal location for that. So seed planted.
Jennifer, if I could jump into you.
Yes, please.
So right now, ADA requires 5% of the units developed to be accessible. And so perhaps that could be something that, if it's a weighted value, could be part of your inclusionary housing program, which would ask or provide benefit or incentives to move that number a little higher. Maybe it's 10%. And also, and I got 2 emails today from seniors that are in this situation. And just another from a Colorado experience with disability, and they're all eligible for a housing choice voucher, but I can't give them one. And so, I think that lobbying and advocating for incremental funding for the housing choice voucher certainly impacts our Coloradans living with disability. Over 70% of Coloradans living with disability are extremely housing burdened, and we heard some of those statistics of what that means. So, I think that if we can do that, because they're always going to be on a fixed income, right? And there may be, as was shared, some alternate gig work that could help them. But ultimately, I think those are the key proven drivers of providing housing stability for IDP folks and folks in the state.
We are grateful, and that's the great example, and I wish our community could have seen our panelists who have not met each other, gathering and communicating and brainstorming in the back. I'm assuming that we will all continue to see each other frequently, and I would love to have Peter's group develop a really fabulous project here in Broomfield as we move forward. And we'll end with, Dana, can you do a shout? We're having a volunteer match. Can you just provide information on that? Just real quickly, we're getting a lot of questions about how people can help time and talent. And that is,
Yeah,
please.
sure. So are most people here familiar with the Broomfield Community Foundation and the Broomfield Chamber of Commerce? Excellent. So they're actually partnering to do a volunteer match. It's basically just a way for people who are interested in getting more involved in the community to learn more about different nonprofits and ways that you can get involved in the community. And I'm actually looking it up because there was supposed to be a virtual one today and it's next week, and I want to say it's Thursday. Next Thursday, the 23rd. And there would be information on the Broomfield Community Foundation website or on the Broomfield Chamber of Commerce website. But that would be a really good starting point. And then there's a resource table outside as you all leave, and I know a lot of us up here have put information out there on ways to get involved as well. And so we're not going to say we're looking necessarily for laundry detergent, but we're always looking for other things. So every organization here operates on a shoestring and a whole lot of parts. So yeah, we would welcome your support.
So we'll also have that link when we send out all of the contact information and the link for this meeting. And the individual that handed me this card, I am going to meet you in the lobby. Okay, and then we'll put you up. Okay.
Thank you all so much for your attendance tonight. It's really hard to get up there and talk about these issues.